Good afternoon. This is John Richardson speaking with you from Toronto, Canada. Today is Friday, July the 17th, 2026. And my return guest this afternoon is U.S. tax lawyer Virginia La Torre Jaker, who is actually based in Dubai. And we are today going to continue our discussion of 2 weeks ago, or at least that began 2 weeks ago, about the status of FBAR and the IRS removal of the delinquent FBAR submission procedures from their site as a compliance option. So, with that, Virginia, how are you today?
Hey, John, I'm doing great. How are you?
Well, I am fine. And, no matter what else is going on in the world, there's forest fires in Canada, there's very bad air quality. The sky has turned a strange color because of these fires, but FBAR continues on.
It certainly does. And now we have a whole new landscape.
Well, we certainly do. Now, when we talked about this very, very quickly a couple of weeks ago after the change on their website. And so you, as either at the same time or immediately after our discussion, published an announcement of this change on Forbes, right?
Yes, that's right. I published that Forbes article on July 2nd, and the IRS had removed the delinquent FBAR submission procedures from its website just the day before, so July 1st.
So you were sort of reporting on that as a matter of important news, more or less, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very important news.
And what had you added as sort of the what can I call it? The advice or awareness component. So that's been removed from their site. Somebody might say, well, so what? What did you say about the so what?
Well, there were a few things about the so what. And one of them was we are now seeing, to my mind, a pattern of tightening relief. This was not a trend that began with the IRS removal of the delinquent FBAR procedure. We've been seeing a slow whittling away of helpfulness with regard to foreign issues for Americans, be it, FBARs, delinquent information returns, voluntary disclosure procedures with regard to offshore accounts. We've just been seeing the landscape change slowly over time. And I think what we wanted to point out to people was that this latest development, eliminating the delinquent FBAR procedure, suggests the IRS is just less willing to offer any kind of safe harbor. You had called them safe harbors, and I think that that was a good analogy. Safe harbors for offshore compliance, they're disappearing slowly but surely, and people that have not, gotten their act together for whatever reason need to really shore up and get things solidified and taken care of. So that was a big major so what that we discussed in our last podcast and was really the focus of my Forbes article. I went through each of the things that we have seen change, and this latest one being the FBAR delinquent procedure. But since that time, John, very interestingly, I received an email from the IRS media office, and it was very, very brief. And it said, IRS statement, the Internal Revenue Service recently archived the delinquent FBAR submission procedures webpage. Penalty relief has and continues to be available for taxpayers making late FBAR submissions by relying on the reasonable cause language noted on the FinCEN website. And then it went on to give links for the FinCEN website, follow the instructions on page 22 in the PDF format, which states, open quotes, if there is reasonable cause for the failure and the balance in the account is properly reported, no penalty will be imposed.
Okay.
So That was the IRS Media Relations Office that sent me this email with its, you know, very friendly "Good afternoon, Virginia," followed by the IRS statement.
Okay, so
So
that's really interesting. I think to understand that, let's perhaps go back to what the delinquent FBAR procedures said up until June 30th and understand that so that we can, I think, evaluate that a message that you received from the IRS in context. Now, let me take a stab at this and maybe you could tell me whether you agree or disagree.
Mhm,
But my understanding, the way I understand the FBAR, delinquent FBAR procedures as they were, and I'm just quoting from this, right? So they're saying basically taxpayers who have not filed a required report of foreign bank accounts, FBAR, okay, are not under civil examination or criminal examination, have not already been contacted by the IRS about the delinquent FBARs,
mhm.
to file the delinquent FBARs according to the FBAR instructions, okay. And what it says is, well, basically file them, but significantly, and I think this is the key here, significantly, it says the IRS will not impose a penalty for the failure to file the delinquent FBARs if you properly reported on your U.S. tax returns and paid all tax on the income from the foreign financial accounts reported on the delinquent FBARs and have not previously been contacted regarding an income tax examination or request for delinquent FBARs for the years for which those are submitted. Now,
There's no mention of any kind of, "You need to give us a reasonable cause" statement
well,
or
that's right. But even before we get to that, on an incredibly basic level, do you understand that to be a commitment from the IRS to not impose a penalty in those circumstances?
that's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And as you
And by the way, John, with all the practitioners, et cetera, that I have spoken with who have used this procedure, there was never a penalty imposed. So not only does it sound from the language that they will not impose a penalty, it doesn't say may not, it says will not, that in practice, it followed the language here. Penalties were not imposed.
right. So by eliminating this particular procedure, right? I use the word procedure because they call them delinquent FBAR. They called it delinquent FBAR submission procedures.
Mhm.
Uh, is it reasonable to infer that what they did was they removed the guarantee that penalties would not be imposed?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So with that as background, I mean, I think that needs to be understood to interpret the message from the IRS here. Would you agree?
Well, go on.
Well,
Let's try and interpret the message from the IRS.
well, they're saying, yeah, reasonable cause is available as a defense of
Yes.
penalties, right?
Yes. Uh, it's almost perhaps like they're glossing over the fact that before you had a safe harbor if you met those requirements from the, you know, it's now archived, the old procedure. So if you met those requirements, there would be no penalty. To say that we still have reasonable cause as a way to avoid penalties, yes, that is true. But as you and I know, reasonable cause is not easy to establish. And now it's not only not easy, if you've looked at the Internal Revenue Manual, what they require, the factors they look at and expect the taxpayer to demonstrate, reasonable cause is not easy at all to get. And in terms of using even a professional, we have case law that says it's got to be a professional, that this is their area, that you can rely on them. So, if someone is using domestic, I don't want to cast dispersions at all, but a lot of times domestic tax return preparers, for example, are not as familiar with the international things. And maybe a court will say, well, you used someone that has absolutely no international experience. So the fact that he didn't file an FBAR for you is not going to get you off the hook that you relied on it on a professional.
Well,
So
I think there's no, I mean, in very, very simple terms, Virginia, you would agree with me if I were to say that the whole atmosphere of FBAR is far more complicated than just filing reports on some bank accounts.
of course it is. Of course it is.
Right. Okay.
But I don't think many practitioners appreciate the complexity of all of that. Okay. And for reasonable cause, I mean, I've heard people tell me, oh, well, my return preparer said we have a template online that I can just follow to draft reasonable cause. They have one. And I just have to fill in some blanks. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So
If we were to put this another way, okay,
dangerous.
reasonable cause is not equivalent to providing an explanation for why you didn't file. Agreed?
Absolutely not.
So I think that's
Absolutely
the
not.
key point here, right? The reasonable cause is, well, frankly, I mean, it's a law and a legal specialty unto itself, correct?
Mhm. Mhm.
So, you know, to remind one that, reasonable cause is still available as a defense against a penalty. Is that universally true even? I mean, if we look at the statute, what does the statute say about reasonable cause?
I don't have the statute in front of me, John.
So this okay, so you would agree, I think, that reasonable cause is available only for civil non-willful, right?
Yes.
Okay. So even if reasonable cause is a mitigating factor here, it certainly would have no application if the IRS were to assert a willful penalty, right?
I can't imagine otherwise. Yes, I agree
I mean,
with that.
that is you don't have the statute in front of you. That is exactly what the statute says.
Okay.
The statute itself restricts reasonable cause to, a civil non-willful.
Non-willful. Okay. Makes sense. Absolutely.
I agree. I think it makes sense. I mean, my only point is that, I mean, I agree 100% with your description of the difficulty of reasonable cause. But, what I'm trying to add to this is that it applies only to the civil non-willful in any case, right?
Mhm.
I mean, do you understand the delinquent FBAR procedures, the way they're written? I mean, they're no longer around, but would you have interpreted those to be available to just anybody who hadn't filed for any reason?
You mean if they were willful and didn't
Well, if they couldn't satisfy non-willfulness.
Okay, well, I think there's degrees of that, John, and I'm not so sure. So, you can have willful blindness, right?
Yeah,
And you can have someone that's evading their taxes and saying, "Well, you know what? If they never find out about this account, then I'm cool." That would be different. I mean, but again, if we remember the delinquent FBAR procedure requires, in order to use it, that you have reported your income from that foreign account that was you failed to
right.
report on the
It's
FBAR.
it's purely an information return violation, not a tax.
That's right. That's right. So I think when you look at that, you would think, all right, the person who's willfully trying to hide stuff is not going to be able to use it in any event. But someone who was quote unquote willfully blind because he didn't read what may have been sent to him by his accountant about FBAR and had it available and just turned a blind eye to it. That to me might be a little bit different.
Right, right. The It seems to me the relief procedures were not, though, a restatement of the text of the code here in 5321.
Mhm.
In other words, what my interpretation of this is, I think I'm right, is the IRS created, a set of circumstances under which, if you do this and, come into compliance, we will not impose a penalty.
I think that's a fair statement. And now it's gone.
Right.
We don't have that anymore. So the only thing you can rely on is reasonable cause. And I think people are being very short-sighted if they think it's easy to get a reasonable cause and have that, work. I don't know how the IRS may be looking at reasonable cause statements for these FBAR submissions that are late. Maybe they're going to be a little bit lenient in the beginning. We simply don't know. But you and I know that the Internal Revenue Manual, the case law, sets a very high bar for reasonable cause.
Well, it does. It does. But, or not, disregard the word but. Interestingly, I think it's important to remind people that the law does not require an FBAR penalty, right? I mean, this is totally discretionary on the part of the
Hmm.
IRS, right?
Correct.
So, although one cannot know for sure, in that context, how would you imagine what's your best guess of how this issue would play out? I mean, does somebody file the delinquent FBARs and is given a penalty and then gets into reasonable cause? Or does one submit a reasonable cause submission at the time of filing the FBARs? If so, how do they do that?
I think it's very difficult to do, John, to submit it along with your late FBARs. I mean, because remember, you're going through the BSA website, and as I remember looking at that, you had to like check a box for why you were late, and there wasn't. Maybe there was a little space where you could write something. I don't know if that's changed with along with this change in the IRS.
Well, that's a very interesting question, right? Because, I mean, do you think I'm right that one of the issues with this is at what point do you preemptorily submit a reasonable cause statement?
I think to preserve your rights to claim it, you should. I don't think you should say, "Oh, well, if they come and ask me, then I'll tell them I have reasonable cause." I think it looks worse for you. I think being proactive there is probably the better call.
Mhm. So, I mean, that really ups the ante for the taxpayer, doesn't it, or the person?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And, you know, I'm not sure if other journalists or professionals who have written on this procedure being withdrawn have have gotten this similar email from the IRS that I received. I have a feeling they did. I don't know. But I think maybe, the IRS is hoping that we will be saying, "Oh, but you still have reasonable cause," to, kind of make it look a little bit better. But reasonable cause is very far removed from what we had before in terms of anxiety level for people, in terms of certainty for people that were using the procedure, and definitely in terms of cost.
No,
If someone needs to submit a reasonable cause statement now, I can't imagine that costing, I mean, a good reasonable cause statement. I'm not talking about, 3 sentences. I can't imagine that's going to be anywhere under, I don't know, 5 to 10,000 bucks easy.
I think that's entirely accurate. Now, how would this or should this change the behavior of your basic tax preparer, right? We have all these firms that are doing tax returns for Americans abroad, et cetera, et cetera. Does this change how they should be interacting with their clients?
I would think they should be far more proactive and checking, making sure people understand the repercussions of not filing. Y- y- John, a number of firms don't even really want to file the FBARs for people.
Yeah.
So, I can understand that too. So, I mean, it's a very difficult area. And I think the important point we want people to know is that this is gone and what it really means. And even if, you have this reasonable cause defense, that it's going to cost you and it is not easy to achieve.
Right. And, I'm going to repeat this because I think that for, the normal person in the world, I think this is really important to understand is that reasonable cause is different from explaining why you didn't file. Right.
Oh my goodness, yes.
That's
Yes.
the key because I think that, well, I don't know. I'd be interested in your view of this. I have the impression that, the average person and very possibly the average tax preparer equate reasonable cause with an explanation.
Mhm.
As being synonymous.
Mhm.
Do you think I'm right on that?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that is, that's extremely dangerous. Uh,
Mhm. Mhm.
God, I wish we had a good news topic today.
My goodness, yeah. Well, the case we were talking about before, John, in terms of relying on a professional, okay? There's a three-part test to it, and actually I did a blog post on it, which I just found. The case was Neonatology Associates versus the commissioner. It was a 2000 case. And it was tax court affirmed by the Third Circuit. The court formulated a three-part test to determine whether reliance on a professional's advice was reasonable. And the one that always stood out for me was the advisor a competent professional with expertise in the relevant area?
Right.
Did the taxpayer provide the advisor with all necessary and accurate information? Did the taxpayer act in good faith, relying on the professional's advice? So that that one about the competent professional with expertise, I think might come to bite people.
I think there's absolutely no question about it.
Yeah.
I mean, the way I have always understood that, and I'd be interested in how you perceive it or how you perceive my understanding of it, is that once you get into this area of international information returns and stuff like that, you need to be specifically searching for an advisor who holds him or herself out as somebody who does that kind of work at least a minimum. Would you agree with that?
That's a real minimum, John, because I can tell you, I see it so often now. There are so many people billing themselves out there as I'm an international tax expert or I'm an international tax advisor. And their experience is very limited. And they're going to AI to craft their, you know, responses and so forth. So you need to dig deeper. You can't just rely on someone saying, "Yeah, I hold myself out as an international tax expert."
But if
You
they don't, if they don't clear that first hurdle, aren't you?
Oh, forget it. Yeah,
I mean, that's my
I
point,
agree.
right? So that's the starting point.
Mhm.
And then what would you ask somebody to gauge, to try to gauge whether they actually do have competence in that area? What do you do? I mean, do you advise on FBARs? Do you file FBARs? What's your experience with delinquent FBARs? I mean,
Yes.
how do you gauge this?
Yeah. But, to hold a taxpayer to do all of that and understand that means they need to understand a certain amount,
Which, of course, nobody does.
which they don't. And I don't think it's really fair to expect them to. But in any event, John, a lot of things in the world are not fair. I'm glad we could at least give people this little update. And let's see, I have responded to the IRS on this email and given them my viewpoint that, yeah, reasonable cause is out there, but it's not so easy to get. And I've given them some examples of cases, and let's see if they reply.
Well, that will be interesting. I mean, it's possible that the removal of those procedures was not particularly well thought through. Who knows?
No, we will see. We will see.
But the
Time
bottom
will tell
line,
how it's going to go. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen very quickly that the IRS catches up with the change and starts hitting people with these penalties if they don't have a really strong, reasonable cause statement. But I think it's it's coming down the road, John.
well, I don't read anything in this that they're, going to be going out and aggressively asserting penalties. I do not read it that way.
Mhm.
But what I do think it means is more anxiety for people. I think it means higher professional fees for people. I think it is going to make a lot of tax preparers who do file FBARs extremely nervous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, the combination of those things is I think rather toxic.
I agree. I agree. Well, let's see, John, what happens. But I think, as you always say, you've got to be prepared.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, although this has not been a really exciting discussion, I think it's been an important discussion.
Mhm.
It's dirty work, but somebody's got to do it. So it might as well be us, right?
Yes, someone's got to do it, John.
I do think somebody's got to do it. But, here we are. And speaking of somebody's doing these things, I think it might be a good moment to remind people of your blog.
Oh, thank you, John. Yes. Right. So the blog is easy to find. It's www.us-tax.org. And it's a great, I think, educational blog, a lot of categories in the international tax area that people who are foreigners and have US connections, or, who are Americans living abroad, mixed nationality couples. It covers a lot. And, I've been blogging, John, since I think 2012. So,
Once a week religiously.
yeah,
So let's see, that's 14 years times 52 weeks. What is that? What's 14 times 52?
I don't know, it's over
Way over
520.
500. So, there's a lot of really, really good stuff there in Virginia's blog. So, I mean, I certainly would recommend reading it. I mean, I would recommend reading it even if you're not all that interested in tax. I mean, Virginia has the gift of even making tax somehow interesting. But
People have told me that. What a compliment.
absolutely,
People can start, if they go to the website, they can start with the the tax primer for US citizens abroad and foreigners with any connection to America.
well,
Start with the tax primer. It's got a lot of, areas where you can click and say, oh, I want to learn about FBAR. Well, there's an area. You don't have to read the whole primer. You just click on that FBAR section and it'll give you information. So,
yeah, no, it's great. I mean, it's not cumulative, particularly with a bunch of prerequisites. But if you really, really, really wanted to simplify the theme, somebody might reasonably put it this way. When it comes to the US tax and regulatory system, anything that's foreign to the United States is a bit of a problem.
yeah.
Would that
Yes.
summarize it?
Oh, absolutely. And I have a blog post on that. It's called America to America to US persons abroad. How do I hate thee? Let me count the ways. And it goes
Yeah.
through
And you know what's amazing?
all the different parts of the tax law that
After
just
14 years,
ugh.
once a week, 52 blog posts a year, you are still scratching the surface of how much America hates things foreign, aren't you?
Yeah.
So, on that note, thank you very much for the discussion today, Virginia. As always, it's
Oh, thank you, John. Always a pleasure.
all right. We will talk again soon.